The achievement gap describes the difference in academic performance between groups of students, and unfortunately, Black and Latino males are furthest behind when compared to other students. What are the factors that contribute to this disparity, and what is being done to save our boys and young men? This is what I wish you knew about educating males of color. Hello everyone, my name is Torrin Cooper. Welcome to I Wish You Knew. Test scores and graduation rates show that males of color have a more challenging time in school. This is an issue not unique to the District of Columbia, but one that is national in scope. Today, we'll talk about why and what can be done to close the gap. But first, here to tell you what they wish you knew are...
Hi, my name is David Gutierrez.
Hey, my name is Zeppelin.
Today, we're excited to have on the show two educational leaders in D.C. who are in the trenches committed to the hard work achieving educational equality for males of color. Dr. Marco Clark, founder and CEO of Richard Wright Public Charter School for Journalism and Media Arts, and Dr. Ben Williams, principal of Ron Brown College Preparatory High School. Welcome. Thank you guys for joining us on the show today.
Thank you
guys are like giants in the world of education, so it's really a blessing and a privilege to have you guys on the show. Let's start here. Can you tell us about you guys as students and what that was like, and maybe some of the similarities or differences of the students that you teach, the males of color that you lead in school?
I'll defer to the elder.
Well, I'll start with my journey. I grew up in urban America and was educated in a poor public school system. I was labeled as a functional illiterate at 11 years old in the 6th grade. I spent 5 years in high school. I scored 480 on the SAT. I graduated from high school with a 1.6 grade average. So the kids I serve, they are just like me.
Yeah.
The thing that's so interesting is that you know, that used to be a curse for me. It was a time that I didn't want to share that story with anyone, but as time went on, I realized that my story was I put people in a position to be able to help others.
Right.
And so when I look at those kids that I serve every day that comes from the lowest socioeconomic wards in the District of Columbia, my story can only be a help for all of them. And so we look at how we got to educate these kids. Somebody has to jump in the trench. Nobody jumped in the trench for me.
Right.
And so since no one was in the trenches, then my story is the way it is. You know, how could I graduate from high school with a 1.6?
Who let that happen?
Why did I score 480 on the SAT?
Right.
And, you know, I went from being labeled a functional illiterate to a PhD. That wasn't supposed to happen because the data said it couldn't.
Yeah.
Does that help you chart how you kind of help steer and guide your boys, like knowing some of the mistakes that you kind of went through that led you there? Do you kind of know how to better redirect and chart them?
Absolutely, because we educate through the lens of kids. So
Gotcha.
when I'm looking at them,
Yeah.
I'm looking at it from the same lens that I used to look at education. I didn't care about the instructors because they didn't care about me.
Wow.
I didn't care about the administrators because they didn't care about me.
Yeah.
And so that had to change, and to change the trajectory. And so you give kids a sense of hope and security. You put them in places and spaces where they can network with individuals that others say they shouldn't be around. My kids go to the White House, they go to the Capitol, they go to various places that they are introduced to people and they belong there.
Yes,
I make sure that they wear shirt and ties because we have to train them to be professionals at an early age. That's how you get kids to the next level.
Right.
Wow.
Speaking of shirt and tie, Dr. Ben Williams, your students have to come with a blazer and a shirt and tie. Before you talk about that, can you talk a little bit about your experience as a student in school?
That's a long story that I'll try to make as short as possible. I've had the fortune and pleasure of having teachers and administrators along the way that cared. And that's part of the reason for me making this journey or being a part of this mission to educate young men of color. I was a foster care kid growing up. Mother was a prostitute, and so as you can probably guesstimate, I did not have a foundation in education. Bounced around to multiple elementary schools and eventually middle schools, and the consistent was school. The safe space was school. Even through traumatic experiences, school was a place, a refuge for me to get away from the struggles of the world. And so, similar to what Dr. Clark stated, we look at educating students through that lens and knowing that they're coming in with similar traumatic experiences. And so we have to create a space that not only pushes them to be great, but also of understanding and of love, because they might not be receiving that in the space that they're coming from. You know, so for me, once I got to high school and stability, it changed dramatically for me, but I also found myself in a space where I was the only. So I put myself in a position to be the only African-American or Latino male in AP courses, knowing that I didn't fit, knowing that I shouldn't have been there, but I put myself there because I needed to be able to navigate that space in that world and understand the perspective of others about me. What led me getting into the position that I'm in today is that I saw that as a student, I then saw it as a grad student, and then I saw it as a professional. Not much had changed between the 15 years of me being a student and me receiving my doctorate. I saw that as a problem. And so for us, it's about not only serving our students academically, but serving them social and emotionally as well.
And that's important. David, can you talk a little bit about your experience as a student?
I grew up in Columbia Heights, right here in DC. Unfortunately, my neighborhood school weren't as great as other wards' neighborhood schools. So I was fortunate enough to get into Johnny Elementary School, which is right by the National Cathedral. But, you know, because my neighborhood school wasn't great, I had to, you know, travel 30 minutes, 40 minutes on bus to another whole area of the city to go to school. And that was the same deal for middle school and high school. But I think it's important that our neighborhood schools are improved. Have programs for our kids, because the kids who weren't as fortunate enough as me to go to another part of the city to go to school, you know, kids I grew up with, their situations now are way different than what mine are.
And that's important, and that's equity, making sure every student, every school across the city has the same thing, or have what they need to support the students academically, socially, and when they get to graduate, help them transition to college and to start healthy careers. This is great, but we got to take a break. But first, it's trivia time. Morgan Freeman stars in what movie about a principal determined to improve an urban high school? The answer when we return. Welcome back to our Weekly News. So, Dr. Williams, let me ask you this. What does it actually take to ensure that our students have the best chance at a bright future?
The young man spoke a little earlier about equity, but it's not just about equity within schools, it's equity within our communities. We only service our kids, our students, our young people, maybe 8 to 10, maybe 11 hours out of the day. But they have to go somewhere else once they leave that school. We can have the greatest programs within the school, but if they're not supported out in the community, then we have a difficult task ahead of us. So to really, in my opinion, personal opinion, in order for us to continue to develop in this city and continue to change the narrative of our young people in this city, we have to have just as much of an emphasis on the community as well as the schools. Providing thousands and millions of dollars in resources in schools are not going to change the fact that most of our students are going back to traumatic experiences, and that we then have to address the next day or whenever they come back to school, that barrier exists. And so for us to continue to develop our young people and give them a chance to be able to navigate post-secondary, we have to give them the skill sets to navigate their communities as well, and having some supports and some safe spaces in the community for them to go feel supported during difficult times within their with their immediate families or communities.
What are some of like those tangible ways that you kind of would recommend and suggest that happening? That's my first part of the question. And the second part is, when you kind of go in front of different individuals who are able to make these sorts of changes, do you kind of ever receive pushback? Because it's like, well, you know, you're supposed to exist in this space right here, you know, what goes on outside of your doors isn't really any of your, you know, business. And so, yeah, those.
Young man, if I had that answer, we'd be having a different type of conversation. We address what we have in our building.
Okay.
You know, for me, we had 100 students last year. We're going to have hopefully 200 more next year. We have to address their immediate situations. I can only deal with those 200. I can make suggestions to our leaders of not only our city but our nation to really start to invest in developing our communities, not just urban communities, but rural communities as well.
Right.
But that answer doesn't exist in me. There's others that have to be receptive of that. And I can only address our building right now. And the hope is that we, and Dr. Clark I think will attest to this, that we continue to create spaces where our students feel safe enough to take chances, that they then learn how to navigate their spaces. We can only address that. That is our hope. Our hope is that we see our kids every day. Our hope is that that nothing happens from door to door, and that they're able to come back into our space because we've created a space that they want to be in. But it takes much more than our schools. It takes much more than that, and I think people are going to have to see that and stop chastising schools and what schools are not doing, and start thinking about what we as a community are not doing to support our schools better.
I think he made a great point. Everything Dr. Williams just said is just one thing I think he left out, and that's the parents. We're going to have to, because we do door to door, but what happens on the other side of the door?
But that's tough, because I work in a school where some of the parents aren't even present. I mean, they're just like guardians or brothers and sisters who drop them off. So do you reach out to the siblings as well too, or the aunts and the uncles? Because we don't see a lot of parents sometimes.
Well, I think there's a couple things that have to happen. Leaders, we have to recognize that we, in a sense, have to train and raise some parents. I mean, we have some very young parents that have kids in our school system, and they weren't trained properly. So we're going to have to open our doors to make sure that that happens. We also need the resources of the city and the support of the city to get behind, to understand that there is a real problem with parents and parents not doing their job. So it makes our job a lot harder as educational leaders when we are stuck trying to not only educate, provide social emotional skills, raise them, feed them, clothe them, in a lot of instances mentor them. The list is infinite, and so we need help, and it starts at home. Regardless of what your parent is the first teacher. And if we don't go back and rely on the first teacher to help us improve our school systems and improve what happens at the school, then we've kind of lost the race from the beginning. If a kid shows up in pre-K or kindergarten and they don't know their letters, they don't know their alphabet, and they can't read a sentence, they're already behind. And so we work from the bottom up. We're already behind trying to get them there, and then our standards and requirements pigeonholes us to a particular point where it makes it very, virtually impossible. But we got to get back to some basics. Everything he talked about with the community and how we have to do as a whole, but we also got to not let our foot off of these parents, because they have to do the job. They signed up for it. And they got to make sure it happens. And
speaking of community, one thing that I've noticed, a trend that I've noticed, and I think you may have started it, the first day of school or before school, you have men lining up in front of the school to greet the students. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called Man the Block program because we believe in safe passage to and from school. Kids that want to come to school, they shouldn't be accosted by kids that's preventing them from coming, or the community, anybody that wants to take away from their relevance of wanting to achieve their aspirations. And so that program is designed, we believe that more adult presence in the city will deter some of the negative behavior that happens with people looking for problems. And so we got to make sure that the kids that are trying to get to school, that we beg to come to school, that they're safe getting there, and that they feel comfortable coming to school and going home.
And what Dr. Clark is doing, and I think he made mention of this, but wasn't explicit, accountability.
Definitely.
We're accountable as leaders. We have statistics that state what type of school we are, but those accountability measures don't take into account social issues that our students are coming into the building with because of parents who had poor school experiences, who then are not as invested, a community who is cyclical, and it's a struggle because we are working from behind, and then we're being compared with measures for people who have extreme investment from families who have preparation. So now you're comparing apples and oranges, but expecting it to be a comparison of apples to apples.
Yeah, and I definitely think accountability is the key for the school leaders, for the parents, for the school system, and nationally too, DC government and national government as well. Holding these people accountable for making sure that our students have the best, and that's important in the school and outside of the school as well. But we got to take another break here. This is getting great. Be sure to tell us what you think by using the hashtag IWYK. I wish you knew. Welcome back to I Wish You Knew, and thanks for staying with us. So Dr. Williams, your school is an all-male high school. Why is that important to educate males of color? Well, not just males of color, but males separately from female students.
So it's a resource in the city. Just like there are resources throughout the city. You have application schools, you have charter schools, you have comprehensive neighborhood schools. What our program does is that it focuses on the single gender itself, and knowing that young men learn very differently than young women. And it really just provides a different space and a different environment, hopefully giving young men an opportunity to be their genuine selves. Especially when you get to high school, we all know the first thing is on our mind are young women, if that's your preference. And so hormones are all over the place, and I think a single gender space really allows the young men to be 14, 15-year-old young men. But it also allows us to be very specific and targeted in our instructional practices as well as our cultural practices. And a lot of it then breeds confidence in young men. And that's what has to happen. We were 100% young men of color this year. We had to address some of the social issues that the young men experience on a day-to-day basis. And so we have to teach them how to navigate the world when they leave high school. Because then once they're on their own, unfortunately, your complexion as well as your gender it's used against you in many different spaces, and they have to understand how to navigate that space. And having that type of targeted population in one building allows us to create a program very specific, and that program is going to have to change every year. We're going to have to be extremely flexible because we're open to every young man in the city. We have a very diverse group of young men in this city, and that population may then show that. And so we will have to change our program, but the foundations of the program is built on the premise that we're educating young men.
So David, do you feel like in school there were some problems or issues that you dealt with that were specific to you as a male?
Well, I was one of the few students that had to go from one part of the city to the next just to go to school. So when I was 7, I started catching the bus. Without my mom. So, and it wasn't because she didn't care. She had a job to go to, you know. So that was one of the few things, one of the few differences at school. I would say is the good thing about my elementary school is they tried to include my mom in everything I did, everything I was involved in, whether it be sports or some club they had at my school. Another thing for me growing up was a language barrier with my parents. So they were perfecting their English while I was in school.
How do you guys work through that?
Well, they just they sat with me every school event. They would pay attention to what our school leaders would say. And my sister's only about 4 years older than me, so just as much attention they put into me, they put into her. So
did you have any school leaders who looked like you in the school?
We had one secretary at the front. She was Hispanic, so
and that's important. Representation is important. I didn't have my first male teacher until 5th grade, and then not again until into high school, and those guys were really instrumental in helping me get to college and be successful in college. Dr. Clark, can you talk a little bit about the importance of representation?
Representation is so important, the right representation.
Right.
I want to, make sure that we're clear. Just because a person looks like you doesn't mean that they're the right representation. Right. But having a person that you can look into and grow, grow from and say, wow, I can really see myself as that person is a big deal. And so I think schools need to make sure, as we are, aligning ourselves with recruiting and hiring different folks to work in the school, there has to be a synergy there. And that synergy has to say that I'm flexible, right. I'm dedicated, and I'm dependable, and the kids matter most to me. And so as long as that happens, you're going to get everything that you need, and you can push forward to at least work towards the goal that you're trying to achieve, and that's so important.
So I have a question, or a statement then a question. So role models, as you kind of were talking about, and then influences as well, especially when you kind of talk about helping to educate individuals, is super important. Something like social media, how do you all as educators approach bringing up the next generation, with that being such a huge component in one of the major ways that students are almost educated to a certain extent, because it's also unfiltered, it's not like it's really controlled. How have you all kind of changed your teaching styles and techniques and approached it?
Fortunate for me, my school has journalism and media arts, so we use the social media aspect as a very positive tool for learning. Gotcha. And making sure that kids know that you got to put out positive things, because your future is on the line when you post something negative. Absolutely. And so we use that as a platform to get out a positive voice, to change the trajectory, that everybody's speaking negatively about young people when they have something positive to put out. And that's how we use social media to our advantage. Wow.
But I think, to Dr. Clark's earlier point, about diversity, you look to be culturally competent and culturally flexible. And so in our generation, there wasn't that much social media, but in our mindset, we have to understand that this is a foundation of this generation of young people. And so we have to be very flexible in that thinking, in that processing, and understanding that this is a major part of their life. So maximizing it, leveraging it, using it to our advantage, to further educate the young person. And I think Richard Wright does a wonderful job and is an exemplar on how to use that. We were just learning how to use it. We prevent phones in our buildings, so that's a way of keeping off the social media. But I think what we're also trying to do is to really help them build a better platform to express themselves and to be hyper aware of the use of their language and their perspective, because it can come back and hurt them in the long run. And so giving them that understanding and that education, I think, is very important, and it's extremely important from us to educate them in that manner, because we know the outcomes. They're still learning. And so if we don't present that and put them in a situation where they understand that and get to experience it, and then we've not done our job very well.
Right. Cool. So before we wrap up, Dr. Clark and Dr. Williams, can you give us some final thoughts on this topic, the importance of educating males of color?
It's so important. There's not enough words to even come together to talk about how important it is. I'll just say this: if we don't educate and raise up males of color, and we don't allow them to be leaders and teach them how to be leaders, then the communities that they live in will never thrive. Right. And so we have to make sure that we are training them if we expect to see positive change in the communities in which they've grown up.
Yeah.
I think it's historically, African American and Latino young men have had a major impact on our communities, through our society, our global society. If we are not constantly educating and preventing our young men from becoming extinct, then we're doing a disservice to the global community, because they're brilliant. They're amazing, they're talented young people, and we have to continue to foster that and to encourage it. Right. So, like you said, I mean, we can go on this topic for hours and days, but at the end of the day, it's extremely important to have diversity in our community and to continue to encourage young men who are brilliant and talented to be able to go out into this world and present that talent.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments about community and diversity and really instilling in our kids, and especially our young men and Latino African American males, that they can be someone. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, but you have the potential to be who you want to be. And as one brother posed to me before, they have to see us to be us. So that's why we have to make our presence known in the school and the communities, and empower the community as well to take ownership of educating our males of color. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the show today. Thank you, Dr. Clark. Thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for stopping by to share your thoughts on this important topic. But before we go, the answer to our trivia question is... Lean on me. Got it. Lean on me. Morgan Freeman stars in this movie about a principal who leads a New Jersey school in turning around its students' failing test scores. Thank you all for watching. See you next time. Yeah.